And we are now live. So we can proceed and start.
I would like to acknowledge.
So we just need to let people into the room. And I'll just let Angeli do that, and then we can start. Excellent. Welcome, everybody. We're just letting a few more people into the room. So we might just wait 1 minute. And or we have Ketchup Peters from the Ketchup Peters group who will be moderating this evening. But before we move ahead, and she'll reiterate this fact, we just want to make everybody aware that this meeting will be recorded, and it is also being streamed live on my Facebook page. So if you don't want to appear on camera, just ensure that you keep your screen off. If you have no problem appearing on camera, that's fine. But we just want you to know that we note that many community members can't always be available for the actual live event. So we want to ensure, not unlike other Black community town halls that we've held, that people have access to the material after the event.
I acknowledge that I am living and currently working on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I extend respect to them for their century-long stewardship of this land. I also acknowledge that this is the land to which our African ancestors were forcibly brought and whose forced labor built this land. We acknowledge the resistance Indigenous people and our ancestors maintained against their oppressors, to keeping to the resistance. Nous reconnaissons que nous sommes présentement et nous vivons sur un territoire non cédé du peuple algonquin et Anishinaabe, et leur témoignage du respect pour leur gestion séculaire sur cette terre. On reconnaît aussi que cette terre est aussi une terre où ce que nos ancêtres africains ont été forcément emmenés et forcés à travailler pour constituer cette terre. Nous reconnaissons la résistance du peuple des Autochtones, et nous soutenons le débat et la résistance de notre peuple et de la nation, de Première Nation. I am Ketchup Peters, part of Ketchup Peters group. Dumo and I will be facilitating this session. Dumo, if you want to say hi to everybody. Good evening. Those of you are. And we welcome you. We welcome you to the session, who was one of the first of its kind, where we are tailoring and creating a space specifically for the Black, Indigenous, and racialized community, in order to create a space for you to integrate your voice to this process, to also ask the questions that are relevant to your need. Merci d'être ici aujourd'hui. Cette session aujourd'hui est une des premières sessions de cette manière, où ce qu'on donne un espace et une opportunité pour la communauté noire, autochtone et racialisée, pour qu'ils puissent emprunter leur voix dans le processus budgétaire à la ville d'Ottawa aujourd'hui. Alors, je vous remercie pour votre temps, et ça va être moi, Ketchup Peters, et Dumo qui va faciliter la session aujourd'hui. La session ne sera pas bilingue. On va essayer le plus possible de pouvoir traduire certains segments. Mais si vous avez des questions que vous voulez qu'on réponde en français, on peut vous donner ce service-là. If you have any questions that you would like to have answered in French, we are welcome to answer them in French for you. Although the session is not a bilingual session, but we will try our best to provide you with that service whenever possible.
Thank you, Katsia. Good evening, everyone. Like Katsia mentioned, my name is Dumo. So glad to see all of us here for this momentous occasion. Just by way of reminder, like Councillor King already mentioned, this session is being recorded. It's also being live streamed on Councillor King's Facebook page. So if you are uncomfortable with your face being live streamed and recorded, you may please keep your cameras off. Also, just I'm sure we're all familiar with Zoom now in the COVID pandemic, which we hope is ending, but just a reminder, if you are not speaking, please do keep your microphone off so that we reduce the amount of feedback. We also like to ask that we use respectful language towards one another, and we also give each other a chance to speak. Feel free to utilize the chat box if you have any questions that are pressing that you need answered and someone else is speaking, and we will address those questions to the best of our ability. There's a lot of us in this room today, so we will do our best to make sure that everyone's questions are answered. So without any further ado, Councillor King.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. I really do want to thank Ketcha Peters, Dumo, and the rest of the Ketcha Peters team really for moderating this event. And I really want to thank my own team members. You see them here tonight, Angeli and Alex, as well as Sophia Jacob, who serves as my equity liaison in my office to assist with logistics in ensuring that we really reach out to community members and have effective community outreach, and for also helping to facilitate this event. I'm Rawlson King. I'm the City Councillor for Rideau Rockcliffe and also the Council Liaison for Anti-Racism and Ethnocultural Relations. And importantly, I want to thank everyone here for attending this budget consultation specifically designed to listen to the BIPOC community. And we are listening. We are definitely throughout this consultation going to take notes. I see my council colleague from my neighboring ward, Rideau Vanier, Matthew Fleury, is also on this call. So we are interested in listening to community members this evening. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being held obviously remotely through Zoom. But though we are meeting virtually, I would also like to acknowledge that the land on which Ottawa is built is unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge that the people of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land, and that the City of Ottawa honors the people and land of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, and that the City of Ottawa honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. I'd also like to note that I value your participation this evening, which is necessary since municipal budgets set priorities for the city. So it's very important that a wide range of voices be heard in the creation of these priorities. The city has been changing in terms of listening to more people. In an effort to address systemic racism, the city has established an anti-racism secretariat to advance a more inclusive and responsive municipal government to ensure all people are served equitably. The Secretariat is also working to increase public awareness of racism and to provide tools for anti-racism education. Recently, the city also endorsed a social procurement strategy and is also just recently endorsed an employment equity strategy designed to increase employment from diverse communities and to work to address discrimination in the workplace, with an aim to increase diversity at the highest management levels. And I'm proud to say that you might have noticed this, that We have one of the first Black GMs ever in transit that was appointed recently. So I think that we are actually making progress. And consultation, public consultation, good public consultation is key to that. This specific consultation around the budget really does acknowledge the need for more community interaction in the municipal process. And over the past 18 months, as Sophia might also be able to attest, I've been very pleased to be able to provide opportunities, especially for the Black community, to provide input and feedback on multiple issues through virtual community town hall sessions. Tonight, we are here to provide an outline concerning how the budget process functions and to listen to you to determine where you believe resources should go. But before we get into a detailed discussion amongst ourselves, we want to provide city staff an opportunity to provide full context concerning the city budget. That's why I'm so pleased that the city's chief financial officer and city treasurer, Wendy Stephenson, is able to join us briefly this evening to set context and lay out the numbers concerning city spending and to describe how the budget process and schedule functions. After she makes her presentation, she'll be able to entertain a few questions, and then we'll be able to move on to listening to community priorities. So I invite our city treasurer, Ms. Stephenson, to provide a presentation to us on the city budget and its process.
Thank you so much, Councillor King, and it's an absolute honor to be here at your meeting this evening. So thank you so much for inviting me. I know we're going to have a presentation that's going to go on the screen shortly. And again, my name is Wendy Stephenson. I'm the city treasurer here at the City of Ottawa and responsible for developing the budget for the city, as well as my staff. And we all have input into that process. So you can flip to the next slide. So the slide just talks about how we develop our operating budget here. And there's an overarching framework that we have in determining how much the city needs to be collected from taxes to pay for our services. And what we do typically is we work backwards from a tax target, or we build up to that number. But really, in terms of the budget development, it's best that we start with that target to make sure that our budgets remain affordable. And the city has to estimate and determine any increases to our expenditures that result from inflation or increases from collective agreements or changes to regulations or legislation in terms of how we do our business at the city, as well as growth to service new neighborhoods and changes in funding from other levels of government. And that could be positive changes where we get extra funding for something, or potentially where some funding buckets may decrease. And then when we look at all of those changes, they're offset by savings from efficiencies that can be achieved from our operations. And there's a lens that we put on that every year as we're developing the budget. And quite frankly, throughout the entire year, we're always looking for efficiencies, as well as increases from our fees that are charged directly to our users for city services, and then taxes that come in from new assessment that particularly help pay for increased operating and infrastructure costs to service our new neighborhoods. And then this year, I'm going to say much like last year as we were developing our budget, we really needed to understand the context in terms of any pressures that we have with respect to COVID and how that influences or impacts our budget as we look into 2022. It was a big undertaking as we developed the budget for 2021, and it's something that we need to provide that lens as we're developing our budget for 2022. You can move to the next slide, please. So this gives you a snapshot in terms of what our total expenditures look like for 2021. This was the council approved budget. It was $3.94 billion. And close to 60% of that operating budget is made up of 4 key service areas. And you can see those sort of in the circle or the pie in front of you. It's our water and sewer, which is basically funded through the revenues, through the utility bill, our police services, our transit, and our community and social services. And much of the revenue from these services comes from other sources than our property tax. As I said, water and sewer is paid for by revenue from the water bill, and half of the transit operating costs are paid by fare revenue. And just over 80% of the community and social services are paid for by provincial and federal funding. Roughly 14% of the operating budget goes towards capital cash reserves to help us pay for infrastructural renewal and growth when we look at our tax and rate investments that we're making. And then the remaining 32% of the budget covers all of our other services that are delivered by the city. So you can see sort of the biggest pieces of the pie in front of you here today in terms of where those investments are made across the city. We can move to the next one. So this slide shows you the sources of revenue. So basically how we fund that $3.4 billion. And you can see that just about 50% of our revenue comes from property taxes. And that includes payment in lieu of taxation, which are payments that come from federal and provincial properties located in our city. We have a pretty big footprint here of federal properties. And then another 21% comes from federal and provincial grants, and 22% from fees and charges, such as our water bill and our transit fares, as well as our park and recreation fees. You can move to the next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of our capital program from 2021. It was approximately $781 million. And you can see that the high asset intensive areas are really in our water and sewer area, our services, as well as transit and transportation, which includes our roads. 60% of the capital budget for tax supported services is for the renewal and replacement of our aging infrastructure across the city. On the water, sewer and stormwater side, it's approximately 91% of those assets. It's very asset intensive in terms of the water infrastructure that we do have. And the remainder is for growth, which is primarily funded by development charges. And there's also a small number of projects identified for regulatory or strategic initiatives that the city is launching. And some of the things that you don't see in this chart are projects that are of strategic importance, and they're not typically approved through the budgeting process and require a separate report or approval through council. There's a couple of really good examples. Think of the Central Library project, which recently went to committee and is going to council shortly in terms of our Central Library, as well as another example is our light rail system. All right, you can move to the next slide, please. So this slide just shows the funding by source for our capital program. And you can see that 64% of the capital funding comes from the cash reserves that we put aside as our capital contribution from the operating budget. So we do that every year to make it affordable. And then the remainder of the capital program is funded by debt, as well as funding from other levels of government or development charges. And those are charges from new developments across the city for new housing. Can move to the next slide, please. The slide shows you sort of the discretion that the city has in terms of the spending for city services. And really there's little discretion, and it's, you look at that 7% piece of the pie here, that's where the discretion sits. When you look at all of the different pieces that make up our budget, the police budget is one. There's really no discretion in terms of making line item changes to that budget. Council can only approve or reject the budget in its entirety. And then you look at the budgets for transit or fire, paramedics, and roads. And those have service standards with them. So any budget reductions or changes would require a change to those service standards. And then there's also a long list of services or expenditures where there's no discretion because the services are just simply mandated or regulated. So things like our long-term care, our public health, our housing, and our debt charges. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a little bit more discretion in areas that are funded by fees, where the fees can be increased to recover the cost of delivering that service, or areas where there's no specific standards. And that's where I talked about those administrative support services. So things like our HR, our finance, or information technology, there's more discretion within those envelopes. We can move to the next slide, please. So this is the budget directions that were approved by Council for 2022, and the report went to Council in July of this summer. And it set our municipal tax target at no more than 3%. And it includes 3 levies within that envelope. We have what's called our city levy, that's our tax supported budget, and the tax increase is 2.6%. The Ottawa Police Services levy is no more than 3%. And the reason that's a little bit higher than our citywide is that Ottawa Police Services is responsible for their own capital budget. So they have to budget and collect taxes and revenues to cover their own capital portion. So that's why you see a slight differential there. And then our transit levy will increase at 4.5%. And that's a little bit higher, and it has to do with the fact that we lost the doubling of the provincial gas tax a couple of years ago. And so we've had to make this up through the levy. That will actually go down in the next, I'm going to say 2 years from now, where that levy will have been made up. And then we have revenues that come in through our forecasted growth, which is basically all of the new builds that happen in our community that get added to our tax roll. We had originally forecasted assessment to grow at 1.4%. We received some good news from MPAC, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, approximately, let's say about 5 days ago. And that growth is going to be a little bit higher than 1.4. It's going to come in at 1.7. So it gives the city a little bit more money in terms of building the budget for 2022. And then when you look at the water utility bill or rate programs, they're going to increase by 4.86%. And that's really in line with the long range financial plan that we have for water, wastewater, and stormwater. And then we have user fees across the city for all the various services, and those will increase in accordance with our fiscal framework, as well as our long range financial plans and any impacts we have in terms of COVID. And then our capital budget is developed in accordance with the direction that's outlined in a couple of really important documents that we have, and that's our DC background study, which is a development charge background study, as well as our long range financial plans and our fiscal framework. You can move to the next slide, please. So this slide gives you an idea of our budget process and the timeline associated with it. So I spoke earlier about our budget directions report. That's really the foundation in terms of how we're going to build our budget. It went to council on July 21st, and we're using that to build the budget. We're having our councillor-led public consultations, much like this one this evening, throughout the month of October. And then we'll be tabling our draft budget on November the 3rd at council. And what's going to happen basically between November 3rd and December 8th is the budget will travel through the various committees. Will there be an opportunity to delegate, the public can delegate with respect to the various budgets, and the councillors can also ask lots of questions in terms of what are in each of those individual committee budgets. And then council will deliberate and adopt the budget as committee of the whole on December the 8th. Can move to the next slide. So this slide's really busy, and it's got all of the dates associated with the various committees. And this is where everyone is welcome to attend the meetings. They're welcome to delegate or ask questions at the meetings with respect to any of the items. And these dates and the committees are all posted on ottawa.ca, so don't feel like you need to memorize them. They are available to you, and you can find them in our budget section. You can flip to the next slide. So there's lots of consultation resources and tools available to all residents in the city of Ottawa. Obviously, There's going to be lots of feedback that's provided tonight, as well as dialogue in terms of the priorities for 2022. We also have an online engagement platform called Engage Ottawa, and we invite people to connect and provide your feedback through that. You can go to the city's website at ottawa.ca/budget, and you can provide information or viewed additional information there with respect to our budget process, and also through the city's social media channels. And it's important to know that all of your feedback is reviewed, it's considered, and we thank you very much for your feedback. It's really important. We want to hear from everybody about what their priorities are. And I just want to say thank you very much for participating in the evening tonight, and we look forward to hearing your priorities. And I also say we always look forward to any ideas you have around cost-saving measures. And I'll pass it back to you now, Councillor. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Wendy, for this comprehensive presentation. So the agenda today is really going to be led by you, by the community, whichever time you'd like us to spend around asking questions and having a dialogue around the budget presentation that just took place. Or we could also spend time a little bit later on with some guided questions that we wanted to tailor specifically for the BIPOC community. So it's really up to you. Right now, we're gonna open the floor to you to ask Wendy any question that you may have regarding the presentation she just presented.
Robin, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Dumo. Thank you, Rawlson, for holding this, and Wendy for that presentation. Yeah, I'm Robin Brown, co-lead of the 613-819 Black Hub. A couple of questions. Wendy, what is included in community and social services, and what taxes do the police collect?
I think the second question is a little bit easier. So there's a police levy on a property tax bill. The city actually collects the taxes on their behalf. So when you look at all of the different requirements for the city, and I talked a little bit about this, where we look at, what are our requirements, what kind of revenue do we have coming in, and then you look at what's left over. That's where we develop what that property tax amount is going to be, what that levy is going to be. And then that levy is then allocated out to the various departments. So you'll see on the back of the property tax bill, we've got a citywide levy. We have something that goes to Ottawa Public Health. We've got police services, like all the various different things. In terms of community and social services, it's really a wide range of services. We've got our employment area there, our social services. We've got our long-term care. We've got social housing, and all the various programs that they run. And there's certainly lots of information on ottawa.ca, and I'm happy to share that with you, Robin, if you want more detail around that.
Any other questions?
I see Hector has raised his hand.
Please, Hector.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wendy. This is very educative and informative. This is Hector from African Canadian Association of Ottawa. I know the increases that you suggested mainly coming from taxes, property taxes and other stuff, fees and other stuff that you mentioned. I'm wondering whether you have pegged this into the cost of living allowance and then inflation and everything, considering the fact that wages haven't increased to the tune that you guys are increasing the fees. And then considering that majority of the city residents don't own properties. So what happens is that, yes, their rent is going to increase. Have you factored in how it will affect their living conditions? Thank you.
Thanks, Hector, for that question. Again, when we set the budget, we look at the net requirement in terms of what those property taxes are going to be. We factor in inflationary increases for a variety of things. And it's interesting too this year, because when we look at inflation, it's it's widely ranging depending on what it is that you're looking at. So in construction, so you think about some of the investments that we're going to make, construction inflation is a little bit more than normal. It has to do with what's happening with COVID in our community, and I'm going to say the demand on the construction industry. But then we have other things where if the inflation is actually below or less than what we would expect to normally set, it's typically around 2%. So that's all taken into consideration. And then what we bring to council is our recommendation in terms of that property tax increase. And so what was approved through our budget process is that the property tax increase will be 3%. And that's applied against all the properties that pay property taxes as we go through our process in terms of actually doing our property tax policy and then issuing the bills and setting the rates.
And I think Andrea's raised her hand.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on this, a similar question about the inflation. Today, the numbers announced that it was the highest that it's been in 20 years at 4.4%. What was budgeted, and is that going to impact or reduce other services in the city's budget?
Oh, it's a really great question, Andrea. Thanks for asking that, because it's a little bit, I'm going to say a little bit different this year in terms of where those high inflationary increases are. And that's where I talked about the construction pieces. So our capital budget, we know will have, some of the impacts will be a little bit greater there. But then things like here's an example of some of the things that we do at the city to try and control our costs. We actually enter into what's called hedging contracts to buy our fuel. And if you look at the price of fuel today, it's gone up significantly. But we basically lock in contracts to purchase our fuel. And so we get savings from that as well as predictability. So it means we're not necessarily hit by those large increase in prices because we've negotiated a deal and our actual prices are lower than what the market rate is. So it fluctuates and depends in terms of where you're looking at all of these different things across the different areas and services that we offer. But largely on par, when you look at the increases, I'm going to say on average, like somewhere between, I think, 1.5 to 2%.
So Wendy, one of the areas they talked about in addition to construction is food. And transportation is where some of those higher costs are because of supply chain issues. Given that impacts poor people, marginalized people, racialized people who are higher numbers in low income rate, how is that going to impact like social services and social supports to compensate for those, especially for people who are receiving social support from the city?
I believe the rates for social services are set by the province. So we have to live within the guidelines for those. And so that's how the program is administrated. What we do in terms of some of the community funding that we have, those are increased every year by inflation, typically 2%. And when we look at our community funding envelope, we've grown it and we're going to grow it again next year. So you're going to see some of that money flowing out to the community agencies, which is greater than it used to be.
Okay. So it's increased more. You said 2% was the rate. Does that mean that there's more increase than the 2%? Because if it's 2% and inflation is 4%, then that's a net decrease.
Yeah, no, it's increased by inflation. So you look at our community funding bucket, it's increased by inflation, and then there will be an additional increase to that bucket on top of that. So more. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I see Jean-Marie's hand that's up.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Thank you for the presentation. I'm just curious, and as we have a lot of leaders of organization and diverse communities around the table, like, what do you want us to take as a message to our various community? Like, qu'est-ce que vous voulez qu'on dise aux membres de nos communautés qui ne sont pas, qui participent pas ce soir? We are not taking part on the debate tonight. What do you want us to let them know about the numbers, especially considering the fact that the pandemic would have affected a lot of our members of our communities? And what's the message, a strong message that we have for us?
I think I might intervene there because I think that that's more of a political question than one for our staff. I mean, one of the reasons why we're here is because we want to solicit input. And I think that the city is really driven to solicit input from as many sources as possible. So that's one of the reasons why I worked with others to ensure that we were reaching out to diverse communities through this session, because we want to hear from you. We want to hear what your priorities are. And so that's the message I would take back. I mean, this session will be on my Facebook page. We will also record it. So we want people who might not be able to be here tonight to actually watch it, to get a sense of how city budgets work, and to express to us ultimately what their priorities are. So the message is, let's ensure that we bring people to the table and that they participate so that they can have a voice. I was going to ask a quick question actually to Wendy as well, so that people also get the context of the budget, because there was a question around the impact of inflation and the dollars that go through the budget. One of the interesting things that I learned, and this wasn't just as a city councilor when I came in, but what this was before as a community association president who took part in a session like this, I learned that there is a lot of spending, and I think Wendy touched on this, that is discretionary and that is non-discretionary. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that, Wendy, just for a couple minutes, for a minute. Because I was surprised by how much discretion often council has in terms of dollars that we can allocate to specific projects, and how much because of provincial mandate it has to actually be spent and applied. And I think that also would provide people on this call context.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I talked a little bit about it in terms of that expenditure discretion when we looked at the wheel and sort of, where those standards are. And there's programs that the city has largely in our community and social services area where we are funded by other levels of government, and we must deliver those programs. We can't take that money and put it elsewhere in the organization to spend it. And then we look at some of the other things that we have to do. We have to offer a paramedic service. We have to have fire services, and things like that in the city. We talk about transit. So where those service standards are, which council has set those service standards in terms of, how many minutes is going to be before an ambulance arrives, at your home to be able to deliver that service. So we need funding to be able to support those services for our residents. And when you look at the areas where there is discretion, it's a pretty small piece of the pie. It's really in our administration. I think about the area where I work, or finance. We support the organization, we develop the budgets, we do all of our property tax and revenue billings. We've got our human resources department, our IT department. So they're supporting everyone in the background in terms of allowing our frontline services to be able to deliver those services. One of the things I can say is that we have done an extensive amount of reviewing for efficiencies and opportunities. And I typically speak to this every time the budget is tabled. We've done that since 2001. And my lights just went out. So here's another, this is another energy saving initiative here at the city. So we've done these efficiency reviews, and over the period of, I want to say, the last 17 years, we've shed almost 1,700 FTEs. We've shed $357 million from the budget to be able to try and save or absorb things so we can actually put the money into those frontline services. So it's something we're always looking at.
I thank you for that, and I just always found it kind of stunning that there's a lot of things that are labeled non-discretionary, and of course, which makes sense. Fire services, paramedic services, that makes sense. But we have a small kind of sliver where we can deliver discretionary services, and what I always find really fun is the fact that the library, according to legislative mandate, is something that is discretionary. And arguably for many in this community and other communities, we wouldn't think of the library as being a discretionary service. So then it deletes monies from that discretionary pile. So just wanted to give people a sense of some of the constraints that city councilors work in, that council works in. But obviously the fact that we at the same time want to advocate for greater and stronger services. I see Franklin has his hand raised.
Yes, hi. I'm Franklin Epape. I just have a quick question. Ketia, je pense que tu vas traduire. I'll put it in French. We're bilingual, right? So my question is simple: is that we had an increase of 3%. This 3.9 million dollars extra, and you're talking about $150 we'll be paying in every single home property. So, est-ce que vous pensez que à ce stade-ci, parce que chaque année ça augmente, et on sait que ça augmente parce que la ville a des besoins, mais les besoins sont avérés que nos poches en souffrent. Est-ce qu'il n'y aura pas une période qu'on aura comme une stabilité du budget de la ville? Est-ce que c'est un truc qui va être possible avec le temps? Parce que comme vous avez vu, on parle d'une augmentation de 3%. 3% quand on a une maison, une résidente, où on paye les taxes, on va payer par personne, par propriété, $115. Donc, dites-vous que si j'ai Hydro, Inbridge et autres que j'ai à payer, j'ajoute un $115 sur mes taxes propriétaires. Donc, moi, ça m'affecte dans mon budget. Est-ce qu'on n'aura pas une période au moins où il y aura comme une stabilisation du budget de la ville, que ça, on n'ait plus comme une augmentation drastique? Parce que 3% en augmentation, c'est quand même raisonnable. Merci.
So to translate the question that Franklin just posed to Wendy, as basically what he wants, he sees that we've had an increase of 3% in the budget, and he wants to know, do you think that there will be a stage where we will see some type of stability within the city budget at some point?
So if I'm understanding what Franklin was asking, yes, we did have a 3% increase this year. I think what he's asking is will there ever be a year when there's less than 3% or perhaps a 0% increase? And that's it. When you look at all of the things that we offer here, it's difficult for me to answer that question. Our costs go up. It's kind of like everybody's costs at home go up as well. And so it's either we've got options, and the options would be raising taxes is one of them. We really like to raise taxes only a minimal amount. We don't want to make excessive increases, or we're making cuts to our services or looking for savings elsewhere.
Does that answer your question, Franklin? Est-ce que ça répond à ta question?
Pas très bien, because like what I was asking was that we're talking about an...
Oh, tu es muté, Franklin.
Allô, vous m'entendez?
Non, t'entends bien.
Okay, yeah, so we're talking about an increase of 3%. So I was saying that the property household went up like an extra $1.15. They'll be paying every single person having a home. So as you were saying, I know that the city usually cut here, add there, cut there, and add there. So if this year we're having an increase of 3%, so it means, what do you think that like next year we'll be having an extra increase of like 4%, or just to understand how you guys choose and make sure we get it stabilized for every single person? Because an extra $115 in my budget is a lot, right? So I just wanted to know how you guys decide on all this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Franklin, for that extra explanation. So when we bring our report forward to council with respect to what that budgetary increase is going to look like, we look at all the pressures and extra costs that we have here. We also incorporate any savings that we might have to then present what does that increase look like. And particularly, actually, I didn't speak of this earlier, but there was in that 3%, there's also a commitment that we're delivering on for council in terms of filling our infrastructure gap. So making sure that we're keeping up to date with all of the infrastructure that's happening across the city. So that's, I want to say 2 years ago, our increase was 2% and then it went to 3%. So we could advance some of the repairs that we require to some of the infrastructure that we have. But I absolutely hear you in terms of your feedback. And I would encourage you to continue providing that feedback, because when the report goes to committee, you have an opportunity also to delegate in terms of what that does to you in the city.
Thank you for that. And I'll let Robin go next. And I think that this will be the last question as we'd like to get to for Wendy, as we'd like to get to the community consultation component.
Excellent, thanks, Rawlson. So Wendy, you mentioned the 3% increase that was, let's call it, well, actually approved at the FEDCO committee, right? So the Finance and Economic Development Committee. So it's not approved, it's got to go through, be approved by council. So we're one of the groups advocating for a freeze to the police budgets. That means basically not giving them $13 million. What, is there anything, any rules administratively or legally that if we and other groups are successful in freezing that budget, is there anything legally or administratively stopping the city from taking that $13 million and investing it in social services that actually reduce crime and keep us safer?
Thanks, Robin, for that. It's the police budget is so complicated in terms of like what we can and can't do. It's very legislated and regulated. So council can accept it, approve it, or completely turn it down. But what's interesting, and to your point this year, is there was actually a motion at council, and it's part of our budget tabling this year. So staff were directed to report back on what's actually happening with the police budget. They have a projected, I'm going to say, increase of 3%. So that was approved through that report. But if they don't come in with that true 3% increase, then there's an opportunity there, right, in terms of diverting some of those funds. And then that would go back to council in terms of the discussion of that. So my job as part of tabling the budget is to talk about what is police coming in at, and is there any funds available.
Well, thank you. I think if that answers Robin's question, we really thank you, Wendy, for taking the time out. As our treasurer, Wendy is in charge of the city budget process and has been making the rounds for these consultations. And we appreciate the amount of work that is required to really make that process successful every year. So as I was saying before, obviously our municipal budget sets our priorities. So it is one of the most important things that we work on every year. It's the raison d'etre for council. And Wendy is leading the team that is doing the hard work. So we really thank you for spending some time with us, explaining the process to us this evening.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you, everybody.
And now I think we can move on to the next part of our program, which are moderated sessions around key areas. And we had already started to talk about some of these key areas: social services, policing, and housing. But we'll start with housing first. And so we wanted to break it up into these themes. We do invite people to, if there is a little bit of deviation from the theme, you know, we don't mind that, but we are trying to keep these three themes to 20 minutes. And we want to ensure that we get maximal input from anybody who wants to provide it. So right now, I think I will introduce Sophia Jacob from my team, who will be leading the discussion on housing.
Thank you, Councillor. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see everyone here. I will be leading the discussion on housing, like the Councillor said. I am the Diversity and Equity Liaison with Councillor Rawlson King's office. So today it's much less about like asking the question. It's more about giving your feedback at this point to the questions that I'm going to be prompting with. I do have a couple of sections, and they are affordability, supportive housing, safety and security, intersect of COVID-19 and precarious housing, equity in housing, encampment and homelessness, as well as reconstruction, rejuvenation, and revitalization. My colleagues are going to put the questions in the chat in both French and English, and we will be trying to get to all your feedback as much as we can, and we'll try to get through all the sections as much as we can in 20 minutes. So in the first part, which is affordability, we know the cost of housing is a big problem for many, whether you're renting or buying. What could the city do to improve this situation? We would love to hear your feedback on that question. Andrea.
Hi, we know that the impact, particularly on racialized community, Black and Aboriginal, has been really devastating, disproportionate, both for businesses and individuals since COVID. And actually, historically, I should say, and COVID has exacerbated the problems and shined some light on it. So my question, we know that housing prices, I know that has gone up significantly. Lots of our community have lost their jobs as well. Businesses have gone down significantly. And so housing is a big issue. We also know that the crowding in housing and insufficient housing has been a problem with COVID. The rates of infection is directly attributed to one of those causes, housing as an issue. So I think it's important that the city invest in housing, and there's a huge federal strategy with respect to housing, and how is the city leveraging that to make sure that racialized community, particularly Black communities, are addressed, our housing situation are addressed. The other thing I want to say about that is we don't have a Black community center in Ottawa. And I think the city has huge influence in buildings that have been closed, that's not being fully utilized, to give the Black community a building so that we can have a space as residents of this city and taxpayers to do that. So I feel like that's an important thing that the city can do, is a space that we can meet, as well as more affordable housing and housing supports to help people in those housing. So I think that's a really important issue. And around housing, making sure that in that supply chain, as the city takes positions around buildings, the hospital that's coming up, that there's community benefits, and that Blacks particularly and Aboriginal community are given jobs in those areas. For example, there's a lot of tradespeople in our community, and these all interlink, that's why I'm bringing it up. A lot of tradespeople in our community are not working because they are working as general laborers and making much lower income than they should, because they are not able to get the apprenticeship hours to become journeymen in their field and to join the unions. So I feel like the housing structure can be leveraged, building of houses, to help address some of those problems within our community. So I think that, you know, those are some of the things that the city should be doing, and making sure that they're leveraged, that within those initiatives, that we can get double and triple leverage for the money that's being sent to meet some equity goals in hiring and, you know, including Black businesses in the supply chain as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. It'll be Gwen and then Robin. Gwen?
Thank you so much. Thank you for asking this question. For me, we work with other Black-led organizations, grassroots organizations, with homeless families, specifically in the Vanier area. We work with a lot of homeless Black families around Ottawa, but a lot of them are here in Vanier. At the Tabor building, as many of you may know about this building, the Concord Motel, the Paris Hotel, the Ottawa Inn, and other areas around Vanier. What I find difficult is the way in which some of these families are treated when it comes to housing and access to housing. It's very difficult sometimes to see what they go through. And I appreciate the work that the housing department is doing at the city. And I understand that it's not always easy, and that collaborating with Black organizations is absolutely important. But sometimes there's issues in communication. So for example, we were told there is a $1,500 subsidy that is there for Black families, and that could help Black families get out of homelessness sooner by obtaining housing in the private market, which is not always easy because, of course, landlords are not always ready to receive our people. And so we brought that to the table to many families, and we were told, for example, go find 2 families who are absolutely in need, and we'll make sure that within the next weeks, we can, with this subsidy, help them. So we went and we saw 2 families, a family of 9 people at the Tabor building, who was residing in a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment, and a family of 7 people in a 1 bedroom apartment. And we believed what we were told by the city, and we shared this information with them, and they accepted. They were a bit réticents, like we say in French. They just didn't want to, because they said that there were trust issues with the city in the past, but that since it was us and they see us every day, that they would take it. We went back to the city and said, hey, we have these 2 families who are interested, and we were met with complete silence. Nothing at all. It's been months, nothing at all. The family of 9 people was moved from the Tabor building because a car crashed onto the building, and they were told that they were being moved for 2 days and to pack up for 2 days. It's been almost 3 months. They're still in the same space. And because of all of that, and because of the broken promises, this family broke completely. The mother left with the boys, and the daughters stayed with the father, and the mother moved back to Saskatoon. And so for me, I'm thinking there's so many great Black-led organizations who work together, who are ready to join forces to help our people, our homeless people. It would be great if I look, for example, at the Wabano Center and the model that they have, where they're often given funding to support their people, to find housing for their people. Why is that it's not the case for Black organizations? Because I checked with many of them, and it's not the case for that we are capable, we are able, we work on the field with them. And when I say we, I'm not talking about just my organization, so many other organizations. Andrea talked about a community center, Black community center. We don't have that. We need these type of resources to be able to best support our community. And so I agree with Andrea, having a Black community center, Black excellence center to support our people, but also a fund and finding an organization or several organizations within the community that can actually take care of our people and that have a track record of great accomplishments with many hundreds of families that are homeless. Over the summer, we moved 5 families, and it was work that we did with other organizations looking for housing in the private market for them to make sure that they were out of the Tabor and other places. So it is possible. We just have to be given that chance.
Thank you so much, Gwen. I'm quickly going to run to the chat before you, Robin. There is now a new community center for the Black community called the African, Caribbean, and Black Wellness Resource Center. It is located at 1021 Cedarville Road. Robin, you're next.
Thanks, Sophia. Thanks, and Gwen, for that, your comments. I'm glad actually Gwen's here because I'd like to hear Gwen's thoughts on my comments. So in terms of, okay, so one thing, so part of the reason that we're advocating, as I mentioned, to freeze the police budget is to take that $13 million and put it elsewhere. So one of the places that we recommend, from what we've heard, is to put money into rent subsidies for people, to increase rent subsidies, and to not penalize people who are working, right? Because I was working with Gwen, and there was a family there who, anyway, they got penalized because the mother found a job, and then all that, right? So they got to adjust that. The other thing the city could do is to mandate affordable housing as part of new development, right? So when all these developers building all this stuff, they've got to be mandated to create, and we're talking deeply affordable housing as part of that. A fourth would be, and this I heard recently from a sister who works in Britannia. She's saying that there are families who have been the victims of, or members of the families who have been the victims of gun violence, right? Who need to move, and they're not, but that criteria is not on the priority list, right? The priorities are women fleeing domestic violence, which is very justified, and overhousing. So if you have people who are like in an apartment and they get 4 bedrooms, there should be 2, they move in, which anyway, but this sister was saying that should be added to the criteria too, because there is a safety criteria, but that doesn't seem to be considered as part of it if people again, have family members who have been the victims of gun violence. And the last one I'd say is to support ACORN Ottawa's anti-displacement campaign, right? Because they've been calling on the city of Ottawa or the anti-displacement campaign to prevent rent evictions and demo evictions like the ones we saw in Herongate and Manor Village.
Oh, okay, thank you, Robin. In the interest of time, I'm going to pose the next question, but I'm going to ask my colleagues to put it in the chat, and so people can engage in the chat, because I want to get to the next heading. So the next question I would have asked was, rank your top priorities for affordable living. So here are your options: transit, green space, walkability, which is accessibility, example with the 15-minute neighborhoods, proximity to retail, access to schools and healthcare facilities, or other option, your suggestion. Those are going to go in the chat, but I do want to get to our next heading, which is supportive housing and the standards of living. What has been your experience with property standards or management of where you are living for folks who are living in low income or OCH or cooperative housing or areas to be considered low income? What has been your experience? Or if you're not directly living there, can you give us some examples of somebody who's close to you, what you've witnessed if you visited them or what you know of? I don't see anybody in putting their hands up, but I'm gonna ask Gwen, as she was just talking about a few things that she's seen in some of the housing that she had been to.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so if you can just talk about some of the property standards, like what were you seeing when you went over?
Okay, so I am there at least 4 or 5 times a week. I'm at different places, at the Tabor, at the Concord, at 665, which is Paris Motel as well. And I can talk to you, first of all, about the Tabor and my experience there. The Tabor was not well maintained for a while. Robin is my witness. He visited the Tabor with me. He's seen the living conditions of families, which for a country like Canada is quite a shame. We've seen families of 8, 7 people packed in a one-bedroom apartment with almost no space, with no space at all. And during the pandemic, as you said earlier, Sophia, there's challenges that have been amplified by the pandemic. And one of them was studying at home. And so we now had our children having to share their study space with 6 other siblings, which was almost impossible for them to do. And I witnessed at one point a young 8-year-old boy having his teacher get upset with him, saying, "You need to move to another room." And he had to tell his teacher, "There is no other room. This is where I live," and show the camera. And that's when we launched the headphones program, asking the public to give us a pair of headphones to share with these children. It was a successful program and it helped. But I have been chased by a rat in the Tabor building, which was I just could not believe it. I actually spent the night at the Tabor one night. That a mother was, she was working and she had nobody. So I accepted to spend the night there to help her. And I could hear the rats running around. That was very difficult. I had conversations with the owner of the place who said that he had pest control come several times and that he was going to do his best to fix the place, which he did, have people come back. But if the pest keeps coming, maybe the problem is the building and people should just not be living there. And that's where my issue is with this specific place. Then you have other places like motels that are simply inappropriate for families to be residing there. Andrea came with me to visit some of the families at the motel as well and saw the living conditions of these families. So how do we expect our children to thrive? How do we expect our mothers, our fathers, our elders to thrive while they're living in conditions like this, where at some of the motels here, they're directly exposed to criminal activities. They are exposed to prostitution. They're exposed to gangbanging. And so how can we help them? We do what we can when we can with what we have. But as many of you know, for those of you who have non-for-profits here, we are not always funded by the government. We're not always funded by the city. A lot of the resources come from us, by our people. And so it becomes very, very difficult. Over the summer, we launched a bike club to keep our children off the streets, away from activities that could compromise their future. That was a successful bike club, but we have a collective responsibility, but the city has a big responsibility in this to support our people as they should. We are here. A lot of organizations are here. We're saying we work with them. They trust us. Let's all work together. Let's join forces. Let's do something together. And I see Mathieu Fleury here, and I want to thank him for all of the work that he's been doing, especially to shed the light on the situation of the families at the Tabor. It hasn't been easy. I've seen the resistance as well. I've seen the attacks on his character because he brought this issue forth. I was personally attacked. I was threatened with a $2 million lawsuit for speaking up on the situation at the Tabor and for just bringing food to families. I was told that I was no longer allowed to bring food to these families until some type of investigation was done into a situation that occurred on October 16th, when I was verbally attacked by the owner of this place, who said to a mother who wanted to take the food that you have no rights to take the food here. You are not a tenant. The tenant is the city. So now we have people whose fundamental human rights, even to just have access to food, are sometimes denied in these spaces. And again, it's not in all of the spaces. Some people, some motels owners, some other owners are perfectly okay, but there are some people that abuse their power. I've had mothers, and Robin is there and can attest to this, who shared with us that at one point, one of the owners of these places asked a mother to get on the floor and scrub dirt that wasn't her dirt. She got moved into this place. She got moved into this place and it was already dirty with her kids. She asked for it to be cleaned and she was told, get on the floor and clean. We've had mothers who pulled up their shirts and showed us bed bugs bites on their bodies and that of their kid. And so it's not always easy, and we can do better, and we should do better. And again, it takes a village, and it takes also the city and the government to understand that Black-led organizations are capable, they're able to build spaces to take care of our people, and they're able and they're capable to sit at tables and to have discussions on solutions such as this one today.
Thank you so much, Gwen. And that actually, you answered a lot of the questions, which was my next question was, what could the city do to aid or assist in these type of situations? And you gave a lot of great responses. I know my colleagues have caught a lot of it in their notes. And if they could just put that same question in the chat, I'll let a couple people engage in the chat. But I am going to move on to the next question. It's under safety and security. So we've been hearing from residents in supportive housing that they are worried about the safety of their rental units, theft and break-ins, the safety of their families and their youth. Please share with us your safety concerns, and please share your thoughts on how the city how the city can support the residents, their homes and their families, and how they can help be kept safe. Any resources, shared resources are welcome. There was somebody with their hand up, I'm sorry, but then they put their hand back down. I apologize if I missed you. Matthew?
Hi, good evening, and thank you, Gwen, for mentioning me. And I apologize for being on and off screen this evening. I'm managing between meetings here, but I wanted to hear it, listen in, and also support Rawlson's efforts. In the spirit of your question, I will answer one component, although I would have some strategies for the others as well, specifically for our youth. I think we do have a reality that some of the oldest parts of our city, which includes some of the lowest income neighborhoods in the city, have also the oldest infrastructure. So we're struggling with creating safe cultural and safe recreation and sports spaces for youth, which I think sort of play into these issues of safety. If youth had proper barrier-free programming within their community, that would support building cohesiveness and learning opportunities and crime prevention tactics from my perspective. And Rawlson and I, obviously, we've been engaged on that front for a number of years, but I really think the facilities shortfall and some of the failures of schools of allowing communities to coordinate the use of those spaces is a big kind of structural struggle that we need to get a handle of.
Thank you, Matthew, for sharing your thoughts. I am going to move on. I want to be able to. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor. Go ahead. Your hand was up.
I just wanted to quickly intervene because I thank Councillor Fleury for his intervention. He actually has been dealing with that specific issue that was mentioned. He's also the chair of Ottawa Community Housing, where I'm also a board member, where we're working hard to ensure that we can improve conditions in existing inventory and build more inventory. So we are pushing to do those things. But I also wanted to mention that with the establishment of the Anti-Racism Secretariat, when we brought the communities together and we based the key areas of focus around what the community had suggested. One of the areas and one of the first areas was housing. And in that subsection that we were looking at improving conditions for new immigrants, making sure that Black people, racialized people, and Indigenous people have better are able to have a better quality of life due to better conditions in housing. So that has been a focus. One of the areas also that was identified was around waiting lists and ensuring that properties that are developed are also culturally sensitive. So these are things that we are actively looking at. So we want you to know that we are, and we're trying to do that especially through the framework of our social housing agency, because one of the challenges in the private sector, in the private market, is the fact that as council, we don't have sufficient tools to compel people to build affordable housing. In fact, the new official plan that we're working on, we're trying to get to a definition of affordable housing and affordable housing targets, but we don't have a full suite of inclusionary zoning tools and other tools that would allow us to compel where affordable housing is built. So there are a number of challenges that we are working through, but we want to assure you that we're working on them, and very allied in the cause of what Councillor Fleury is doing, very supportive, as he's supportive of our efforts. But I do want you to know that with our new anti-racism office, housing is going to be front and center, and all the issues that you have identified are definitely in the agenda to be addressed by the anti-racism office.
Thank you so much, Councillor. I am going to move on to the next section, which is the intersect of COVID-19 and precarious housing. Ontario has lifted the ban on evictions. We are seeing folks who have precarious housing, folks who have jobs that were cut because of COVID and losing all types of housing that's pandemic related. The question is, how can the city support these individuals through an eviction or post-eviction and get them rehoused, or at least help them to be rehoused? We would love to hear your thoughts on that question. Andrea?
What I was going to say, we know that lots of people are now working remotely, and I'm going to say probably a lot of people will not go back into the workforce. We have the options, we have the technology, we have everything to support that. So there will be a lot of empty buildings that are formerly used for workers. Of course, they probably need to be rezoned to be residential, right? But that's one way the city can impact, especially the buildings that they own, that the city owns, to make those available and renovate them. I know that the federal government has some funding for housing and all the stuff that the city could also take advantage of and come along to renovate the buildings that they have, to make even transitional housing and different housing options. And while I'm talking about like the transitional housing, we know that housing either depletes people, and housing is a way of gaining wealth. And we shouldn't just limit the discussion to affordable housing in the sense of rentals and all that. We should talk about options, and Robin mentioned this earlier, of how people can get home ownership. So when builders are building, and I know Councillor King mentioned that there's some limitation and constraints right now in the tools that they can leverage to work with developers, but there should be housing. And I think, for us, we shouldn't just try to put, speaking for Black people, put us in rental housing. There's some models that's working, like in Waterloo, working in the States, for rental homes that will give people more security. Because when you're a renter, you can be evicted at any time. We saw the rules passed recently in Toronto that new housing no longer are anything, I think from 2018, I think it was, that the landlord can raise the rent as much as they want, right? So if that's a huge risk for our community, and as Gwen talked about, I witnessed that with her, how heinous those living conditions are. We need to empower people to have permanent housing, and that's through home ownership opportunity, whether it's rent to own or other affordable option where the government, the city could subsidize take part of the mortgage and make it payable further into the future so that it could be affordable for people. There's lots of options that's being done in different parts of the world and different parts of even Canada that the city could do as well, in doing that. And there are some tools available and funding from some of the federal programs that would help to facilitate that. So, you know, I think that's important for us to add to the table to give us permanent housing and really reduce homelessness if that's what we're trying to do.
And, you know, I'm going to interject here. I'm going to let Councillor Fleury, as chair of Ottawa Community Housing, actually speak to this last question that you've really posed, Andrea. Of course, we want to move on to social services as well. But I'll let Matt do the wrap on this because I feel that he has great insight to bring to us.
Thank you, Rawlson, and thank you, Andrea, for the conversation. I guess I come at it from maybe a different point of view. So we have we have a lack of resiliency in housing in Ottawa, partly because we have too much home ownership. Some of the big cities in the country and in North America that are doing well in terms of the housing crisis have some of the highest rates of rental. And I'd look to Montreal as a prime example. 60% of residents in Montreal rent. In Ottawa, it's well under 10% of folks, which is part of the resiliency issue. I don't disagree with you that homeownership is a level of milestone. Don't disagree with you that federal money is available on a number of fronts for some level of, I mean, you raised a number of points, but there are federal dollars available in some areas. I think your point hits two pieces. How can we push the private sector to not be as cowboy with their approaches of renewing rental stock, so that existing renters can keep good status in their housing, as well as maintain the existing lease prices. And I think from a public point of view, we need to build way more housing, and Rawlson can speak to that, but OCH is trying to build 10,000 units over the next 10 years. That to me is, you know, a sign of bright futures from an organizational point of view from OCH, right? We're Ottawa's largest landlord. We're growing our portfolio, we're investing in existing buildings, and we're renewing others. So from an OCH point of view, we're a bit insular, but we do have major impacts. I think what's around us is what's the challenge. But I think you have to understand that this issue of ownership, resilience, and renter, and the proportionate of how that works and the issues there. I think you have to take also a big picture of, we have 13,000 residents on a waiting list for an affordable unit, of which 2,500 are in our motels and shelters every night, as Gwen highlighted earlier. And there's tactical strategies that we can unlock to focus on that. But I think part of our problem as a city is that we're not targeted. We go everywhere, and we have minimal impact, unfortunately, by doing that approach.
Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate that. We are going to move on to social services, but I will get my counterparts, Alex and Anjali, if you don't mind, to put the rest of the questions that I had prepared for everyone into the chat. And so it'll be recorded so folks can engage there. I will pass it back to Dumo.
Thank you, Sophia, and thank you everyone for your lived experiences that you've shared with us and your opinions so far. So like Sophia mentioned, we are going to move over into a discussion about our social services. Housing is still part of this conversation, but we're also going to be talking about food security, youth recreation, outreach services, and childcare, as well as housing support. So I'm just going to start this with an open-ended question. And the question that I have regarding social services is, what gaps do you see existing in our city when it comes to social services? Or rather, let me say, what gaps exist in city-offered social services, especially in our communities? Unfortunately, I'm not going to type the question. I'm not that tech savvy, but I will just repeat it again. What gaps have you perceived that exist in our community from services that are offered by the city in as far as social services? And just for clarification, those social services are food security, youth recreation, outreach services, childcare, and housing support. Robin?
Hey, thanks, Dumo. So again, I want to frame this. So the one of the biggest I'd say is mental health outreach services. And again, this goes back to the whole entire police debate, right? So the hub, as some of you may know, commissioned a report on an alternative non-police mental health system for the city that'll be way cheaper, right, than sending the police. And so that's one of the things that is absent and could be put in place because now we have a plan to do it.
Thank you so much, Robin. Does anyone else want to speak onto the outreach services, especially mental health responses? I know a few people whose names I see here are very verbal about this issue. So I'll extend the invitation before I move on to the next person.
And I'll just quickly translate it in French, just for those of you who want to hear it. La question est, quels sont les écarts quand ça vient des services sociaux que la ville d'Ottawa pourrait améliorer? C'est ça la question.
Thanks, Katia. Sophia?
I just want to encourage folks, some of you may know, but some of you may not know, that there is the Ottawa Black Mental Health Coalition, and you guys can use them as a resource. They've been picking up a lot of programs and services and highlighting their partners' programs and services, and really putting together conversations for our community, particularly the ACB community, around the mental health lens. We are talking about conversations around funding, earmarking funds from the federal government. When they announced their budget, it was about $900 million. We want to know how much is going to be earmarked towards Black communities mental health. So please access I'll put everything in the chat. Please access their website, and there's an opportunity to also engage with the coalition members and the executive community members. Thanks.
Thank you, Sophia. Councillor King. Khadija, you'll be after the councillor.
Absolutely. I just wanted to briefly add in that is also one of the areas that the Anti-Racism Secretariat is looking at, health outcomes, and especially mental health outcomes, and how we can move towards appropriate resourcing for culturally sensitive and appropriate health outcomes for our community. So I just want you to know that is also an area that we're working on, just so that everybody knows that we are still undertaking a consultation process with the Anti-Racism Secretariat on the development of an anti-racism strategy for the city, the first anti-racism strategy that the city will have that will look at these specific areas. And the work is ongoing. There has been a tremendous amount of consultation that took place this year, where the city spoke to over 650 people, and there was the establishment of an advisory table that is also providing some feedback and input on how we go forward with a strategy that will come to council before the second quarter of next year. So I just want you to know that these are ideas, these are areas of focus that the city will look at through anti-racism strategy.
Thank you, Councillor King. Khadija?
Thank you very much. I think a part of the conversation, also like touching on what Robin also mentioned earlier about how a lot of our money does go towards policing systems, but that is a response to a lot of the things that people point out in our area. So like Overbrook and Vanier, I feel like those areas are always used as examples for increasing the police budget and that sort of thing, whereas we're not really looking into how to support the community members that live in those regions. A big issue that I've come across as Chair of Public Safety with the Overbrook Community Association and as a board member is finding funding and finding opportunities for youth, which is incredibly difficult, especially in our area where a lot of people, I guess, we come from varying backgrounds. So when we come to look for jobs and explore what our career paths are, those things aren't really prioritized. Whereas when I speak to kids who grew up in different areas of Ottawa, they have a completely different experience where they're encouraged and have endless opportunities from local organizations to pursue their creative and different outlets. And I think a lot of local organizations have been doing this work for a long time with very minimal funding. So I think those two things, so youth services and funding for grassroots and local organizations, are things that we need to prioritize first before the police or any sort of policing system, especially in marginalized communities.
Yeah, thank you so much, Khadija. We'll have Messi and then Andrea and then Gwen.
Yeah, hi everyone, nice to see you. So I would like to share you actually our recent research, which is conducted on City of Ottawa. Actually, our research would be published on Friday, but I would like to share you how was, specifically the service sector was responding, specifically women who had been impacted by violence and also other, economic issue. So according to our research, we have a finding, it's very interesting, specifically for BIPOC women. During the pandemic, only 36% of women got, shelters and other support by the city. That's what the statistics we got it from, our community group. And also in terms of the mental health, only 33% of women, they mentioned that they got, appropriate mental health services in the community. And the other finding is also in terms of the clinic and hospital as well, again, close to 30% only, they got the service. And the other, finding it's what makes us is more, very curious even to have more research is like the food security. So only 26% of Black Indigenous women in Ottawa, they would able to access food, once in a week. That's what they said. So this is a finding, probably I'm gonna share you this finding. We'll be launching this research on Friday. It will be also on media because this is very important and a critical step for us to design policy, specifically, in our city. And also what I would like to mention is specifically for Black women in Ottawa, what we have seen during this pandemic, housing is also an issue, but the challenge for victims and survivors of domestic violence in our community is most of the women, they don't have even bank accounts. They don't have a good credit score. So landlords, they wouldn't allow them to access even for rent because everybody want to check their credit history. They have to have a proof of like, a person who can sign on behalf of them. But most people, specifically newcomers, racialized women, they don't have those resources. Because of that, they denied. So there are still a lot of women, they stay in shelter for 2 years without any support because of this issue. So right now we are pushing actually the City of Ottawa, including the Government of Canada, including Financial Consumer Agency Canada, to recognize this issue and to introduce a family violence program among the Canadian bank. That's what right now we are advocating. So as a community, this is a huge issue. We need to kind of like, create a trauma-informed economic empowerment program for these women. Otherwise, we are pushing them to stay in that situation. Finally, we will kind of like, come up, hey, this is statistics of femicide, but it doesn't work like that. So we need the City of Ottawa to have a clear plan to protect women, to design also a trauma-informed, economic empowerment program for Black women. Housing is a huge issue because of their credit. Many women, for 7 years, we have many women in our community, they are not even eligible to get like rent, So those are the issues I would like to ask, to mention. And also in terms of the food and security, of course, we raised this issue many times. I had a chance to speak with Kawi and many community organizations. Our challenge is there are mothers with 2-3 kids, Black women. They have a special need children. There is no any special need children food in the food bank. So it's very, very traumatizing when we hear many times this story. So some of the women, they have a language barrier. They are newcomers. They are Black women. So imagine you don't have a shelter that accepts special needs children in the city. plus there is no any special need, food accessible for Black women in our community. So it's very frustrating. So we need to talk, and then we need to raise this issue. So I'm going to share also our finding on Friday for Sophia and for anyone who's interested to read that. So this is the first research in Canada to address this issue and also to expose all the systemic barrier what we are facing, So I just want to kind of jump to share this, because it's just like close to my heart, because I hear every day's women's stories, their struggle. Of course, we have a beautiful shelter bed and restraint order that doesn't solve women issue. We need to have a trauma-informed for BIPOC women to recover from that situation. Thank you so much for listening here.
Thank you, Mercy. If you could post the link for CCWFE in the chat so that people can look out for your stats on Friday.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Andrea?
Going back to mental health, in addition to being a she session that they've dubbed COVID, it's also a mental health pandemic as well. And we already know that Black people, because of racism on top of all the other life problems, right, have more adverse effect on our mental health. We know that when there's racism at work, I'm advocating both federally and provincially to make racism a form of workplace harassment and violence, so that then there can be investigations and potential workman's compensation to people that are experiencing this. So when people are experiencing, racism at work, it has a huge mental health effect, because it also has a huge effect on their economic survivability, right? And so I think it's important that, one, that we have culturally informed mental health services. And, I know that New Covenant Apostolic Church over the last 21 years, probably 22 years now, has been doing that in the Black community, and it's been historically supported by the church members and their funding. And during COVID, we saw huge increases especially with women experiencing domestic violence. And with the restrictions of COVID, they didn't get a lot of support, right? Because they can't go to shelters, they can't leave. A lot of people were stuck at home with their abusers. And the city has to work on helping community. I know churches are not usually funded, but churches in the Black community are an important foundation of our social services. And I think that really needs to change. And I don't mean churches, mosques as well, right? And other religious organizations. Historically, a lot of our social programs came from those programs historically. And I think that the city should be supporting Black-led, Black-mandated, and Black-focused mental health programs. And also focus on our youth. We see a huge impact on our youth with the pandemic. They're leaving school. I was at our school recently, and there was kids having anxiety attacks. I know I'm like scared about COVID, so I can't imagine what they're doing. Plus they're behind in school, all these things that are happening to them. And some of them, particularly kids, don't have the language to express it. So I think that that's a huge area that needs to be focused on, particularly for our young people as well, to make sure that they're not left behind mentally as well as emotionally and academically in the school things.
Thank you, Andrea. So we'll hear from Gwen and then Marie, and then we'll move on to policing.
Thank you. So for me, it comes back as well to supporting organizations in the community who have been doing this work. I'm looking at many people here who run great organizations that are doing groundwork. There's the African Canadian Association of Ottawa, CAO, represented by Hector today as well. who ran such a great program during the pandemic, especially. It was a free mental health program throughout the year that supported so many of the families that we work with. There are other organizations here, the Black Mental Health Coalition as well. We've had members of ACAO come directly to meet the families to see what their needs are in terms of mental health, because we know that mental health can be very taboo in certain families as well. So it was great to see some of the elders at ACAO come to speak to the families, to the elders and the families, to really emphasize on the importance of taking care of their mental health. And for people in Black communities, finding mental health care or even knowing when one might need it is very difficult because of the lack of information about mental health issues and the limited nature of mental health literacy among Black people living in Canada. And I'm happy that Messi was talking about research. Research is absolutely important. And we found that it makes things difficult when we don't have data, when we don't keep track of how many people in the community actually have access to proper mental health care, especially during this pandemic. It's difficult. So support the research that Black-led organizations are doing. And yeah, when I was looking at, the funding allocated lately, I think by the city, but also some other fundings by the government, it's interesting to see how low money goes into actually Black-led organizations that are, taking care of mental health, taking care of food security, of culturally relevant gender-based analysis and research. So I think that the numbers don't lie. You pull up the documentation and you look at those people who are actually there every single day. I've worked with ACAO. I've seen the work of ACAO. I see the work that Andrea is doing. I see the work that Messi is doing. I see the work that the Black Mental Health Coalition, the ACB, everybody is doing, yet where are the funds, and that's where it's difficult. And it's not always about money, but it is, because our Black mental health specialists need to be paid. We can't continue to ask them to do this work for free. And it becomes exhausting to have to go to Black members of the community and say, and literally beg them and say, please, we're running out of funds, or we don't have enough money. We need you to just donate your time. They have families to feed as well. And it's just like during Black History Month, somehow no one has money to pay Black speakers. So we send other Black people to ask Black leaders to speak for free. And I don't think that that's fair. It's the same thing. It's the same concept. We don't have funding, not because we don't deserve the funding, but because folks just don't believe in us. And so for me, in my opinion, I think that there's a lack of trust sometimes with these funders, and they feel like we can't do the work, or I don't know what it is, that we don't deserve as much funding as others, while we do groundwork with people. Again, I'm looking at ACAO and all the work that has been done last year, all the meetings, the consultations, the dialogues with the families, the trust that we've built with the families, and then the city and then some government entities then come to us and say, well, because you've built trust with these families, we need your help. But then when we ask for funding, we don't get that funding. And so that becomes even difficult for us, even mentally, for all of us who have to continue to work for free. It's very hard.
Thank you, Gwen. Before we hear from Marie and Yodit, I'm going to introduce 2 questions into the chat regarding policing. So if you do want to speak on that, you can also raise your hand so that we just keep a flow going. We don't have enough time to separate the conversations. So I'm just going to post the questions, and if your hand is already up and you're not answering the first question, please put it down so I know where you are in the queue. So Marie, you're next, and then after that, we'll hear from Yodit.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo what Gwen said, what Andrea said. When it comes to mental health, a lot of our community members, they trust us, they trust people that look like them to provide these services, because they've tried other services that didn't work for them. However, we're working on empty because we don't get the support from the city. We don't get the support from the government to provide these services. And often we have to work for free because if we don't take care of each other, who else will, which is unfair. But I think we have to, when it comes to services for our community, we need to be at the table. We need to lead these services because it's for, we know what our community needs because we're there every day. We are serving them, we are hearing them. And I think it's unfair that when it comes to decisions like that, often we're left behind, we're left on the side. But when it comes to favors to be the face of the Black person or diversity, we get called. But when it comes to actually providing the services, we're on our own. So I think it's so important to include Black-led organization and whatever the city is doing for our community.
Thank you, Marie. We'll hear from Yodit, and then after that, Miriam, and then Andrea, is your hand up for the police question? Okay, so we'll hear from Yodit, and then we'll hear from Miriam. Yodit? Yodit, we can hear you. You can go ahead. Okay, we'll move on to Miriam, and Yodit, if you still want to communicate, just let Sophia know. Go ahead, Miriam.
Hi, first I just want to say thank you for allowing us to have the space to speak and voice our concerns. Just going back to the ACB Wellness Resource Center, I just wanted to mention that we are a newly established Black community center in the city, right? And this is what, it's been one of the main topics in this conversation where we've been talking about needing this space. And so if we have it, then I think it's important for the city to start funding it, right? Funding the programs that we need, hiring the Black workers and paying them the way they need to be paid, right? Because like, forget who it is who said it, but it's exhausting to do this work for free, right? And knowing that there's a lot of trauma and knowing that there's a lot of challenges that we face day to day, we can't do this by ourselves. We can't keep taking the money out of our pockets and giving it back to the city while the city is funding other projects that, not to say that they're not helping, but they're not helping us the way that we need to be helped, right? And so going back to some of the services that we offer mental health services. We currently have some of the COVID vaccines, a partnership with OPH. We have a food bank. We also have, we're working on after school programs. And so it's important for the city to take this space into consideration when we're having these conversations and to leverage what is there, right? What we're trying to build, and that being the basis to what we really want to create, what we all have envisioned for ourselves as a Black community. So thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. And if you can post your contact information again, I think you mentioned your Facebook page. And Gwen, I'd also ask if you could do the same as well, just in case there's some people in this room that want to support you as well, that don't know how to get in touch with you. It would be great. So Yodit, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's so nice to see you all today. And thank you for everyone that's presenting the wonderful work that they're doing in the community. My question is specifically to Councillor Rawlson King. Are there any plans to earmark specific funds for the Black community in the proposed city budget is one of the questions. If not, will you advocate for this? And also, I know we're talking about the wonderful, community grassroots initiatives and all of the things that we do as a community and the needs, but can you walk us through the process of the budget so that we can actually have an understanding of what our input today, this consultation, can accomplish? So if you can give us a little bit of, and how else we can give our further comments, but just so that we can actually do something productive with this meeting today, because I think it's a wonderful idea.
Briefly,
Thank you.
I'll just say that there was at the beginning of this session a presentation by city staff by Wendy Stephenson, who is our city treasurer, on the process. So this is being recorded. It's also being live streamed on my Facebook live page. So you'll actually be able to go back and watch that full presentation and get a sense of how the city budget process works. As for allocation of funds, we're starting a process. One of the allocations of funds that I did see that is Black specific is actually around a housing pilot project. So we are starting to see some movement with the establishment of the anti-racism office at the city, which is going to create an anti-racism strategy by the second quarter of 2022 that will result in a list of priorities. And of course, priorities need to ultimately be funded. So the idea here is identifying the priorities. We are in that stage. I also had noted that we had undertaken consultation, and we're still undertaking consultation for the anti-racism secretariat. But once that strategy is created, the city will have a priority plan, and will clearly identify the priorities of community members. It's interesting because that's the way it's designed. It wasn't Councillor King saying, this is what I think the community needs. We've consulted with people to ask them, what are the needs? And what's interesting is many of the needs that are being outlined today are the needs that have been identified by city staff when they've been talking to community members. So I would just say, stay tuned. It's a continuing process. There will be in this budget, you will see a budget line because we saw it in housing that we will have some specific housing pilot projects around the Black community that will be Black community sensitive. But we will also in the future, once we have the strategy, be able to make more of a case to say, we've outlined the priorities, this is where funding should go. And that is an ongoing process.
Thank you, Councillor King. And I would ask if any of your staff members could actually post a link where we can also keep our fingers on the pulse of the committee that's just been launched, so we can see what's happening and see where we can fit ourselves into the whole picture as well.
Yeah, and I would just, that will go in the chat, but of course, engage.ottawa.ca and search for anti-racism. There is a whole section there in terms of consultation and process and where we're at.
Thank you so much, Councillor King. So again, thank you all for your contributions so far. We don't have much time left, but I would like to ask this question out loud and see if that makes a difference. So we heard, we had the conversation with Treasurer Stephenson regarding the budget, and some questions were asked about policing, and just want to get an idea of what your concerns are when it comes to the budget for our police services, considering how it was explained to how they actually get their funding. Do you have any concerns about that? And the treasurer also mentioned that the city council has oversight, but doesn't actually make the budget. Do you think that there's more that they could do when considering that? Robin?
Thanks, Dumo. So just to clarify, so what Wendy said was right. So city council can only say yes or no, but the board can change things line by line. Okay, so one of the things I'd recommend that the city do in terms of improving, because the question is how to improve the oversight, and this comes from having attended many hours of our police services board's meeting, and there are so in order to be effective on any board, you have to engage, right? And there's 2 members of that board, the 2 provincial appointees, who I've seen sit there through literally hundreds of public delegations and say nothing. And when they do speak up, they're usually, actually one guy voted against the proposal to freeze the budget. That's all he said. So I'd say the city needs to advocate to go to the province and say, these people aren't fulfilling their mandate. They need to replace them and put some like Black people, Indigenous people on the Auto Police Services Board.
Thank you, Robin. Vanessa.
Hi. Yeah, I don't think that Ottawa Police Services serves to protect BIPOC people. And so the issue that I have is with the oversight of OPS currently is that the Ottawa Police Services Board is not a place where you can provide any type of complaints with how OPS is currently structured in a way that is impactful for residents who live here in Ottawa. And what I mean by that is that as somebody who has also attended OPSB meetings and as somebody who has also, advocated on behalf of families who have experienced police violence from OPS, whenever concerns are brought forward about the actions of specific police members or even the chief himself, we are always referred to SIU, which is they say an external body to the police, but this is actually a body that is composed of like retired police members that review certain cases and complaints and then provide a decision on what needs to be done to certain police officers and to the force itself. And this is not an external process. This is not an unbiased process. And the OPSB in itself, when I've been in certain meetings, and the reasons why I've stopped attending and actually disengaged from some of the meetings that have taken place is due to the fact that most of the members, I will not say all, that are there on the OPSB floor, they work with the police chief in a sense where they actually take direction from the police chief rather than being an advisory overseeing body. They actually work in conjunction with what Chief Soley has to say and provides as commentary. Police Chief Soley provided a whole debrief about what happened last year when a couple of advocacy groups took up an intersection, Nicholas and Laurier, and then they were invaded upon by police forces at 4 a.m. in the morning. And the chief provided a report that was inaccurate, didn't provide a lot of details as to what happened, didn't provide details as to what happened to folks once they were like apprehended and detained. And when I was trying to provide commentary to the OPSB about what actually happened, I was immediately interrupted by the chair of that board and told that this was not the space to provide that type of commentary. And so I don't believe that you can say that the OPSB is an oversight body for OPS without allowing residents to completely bring forward concerns that are relevant to things that happen to them in the city.
Thank you, Vanessa. We'll hear from Khadija and then we'll wrap up and Councillor King will give us a final remark. Khadija.
Yeah, thank you. I think over the past year and a half, for folks who have attended the OPSB meetings could tell you how those meetings go, the concerns that are continuously brought up, and that sort of thing. And I think there's always like an us versus them dynamic. There's always a team thing where it's either you're with us or against us, and that's the environment that it is at these meetings. Whenever folks come to share their experiences, which is very traumatizing, it's draining, it's disheartening, and it's very sad. I too used to attend these meetings every month to share my experiences and so forth. But over time, that whole process became detrimental to people's mental health, because as Vanessa said, the current structure to sharing, to delegating is very harmful, where someone can come speak, but they're not, and someone else can come respond like on the board, but you are not then able to respond to what they're saying, even if they misunderstood you or misinterpreted what you said or whatever the case is. So we've seen that happen a lot. We've also seen a lot of silencing on that board. There's been a lot of incidents of that. But I think, like I said, there's a lot of team dynamics. It's always an us versus something, but there's no one ever on our team. We're always continuously going to these meetings to talk about our experiences and to talk about the things that happen in our communities, but there's no one on our team. So when we have people on the board who majority are white or white passing, it becomes very hard to have these conversations. But like I said, we've had these meetings a lot. And Rawlson has been at those meetings continuously. He's on the board. But I think a lot of the folks who show up have been pushed away. And I truly think that that's a tactic that policing systems use to further marginalize communities. So I think we all know that policing, the history of policing is extremely racist, xenophobic, discriminatory, and marginalizing. So we took a system and we're continuously building other oppressive systems on top of it to further marginalize our groups. So I think the conversation doesn't have anything to do with budget, but I think it has to do with who do we prioritize in our communities. I think it's also a little bit problematic that we left this topic to the end when the majority of our policing budget goes to this topic. It goes to this department in one way or another. So I think it was a flaw to have this topic at the end when we're now at the end of this conversation, when there's so much to talk about within this theme.
And I like to support the comment that Kendra just said, because in the work of doing anti-oppression, we need to not only advocate for the restructuring of those systems, if not the dismantling of those systems to fit our needs and our way of communicating. With that being said, I know that we had planned to finish at 8 o'clock. It is currently 8:02. If you feel that we need to extend a little bit more time in order for us to continue discussing a little further on the subject, I, for one, is willing to stay longer for this. So any of you who have other commitments and you wish to leave this meeting now, we thank you for coming today. And we'll be sharing the information and the presentation later on for you to see the information that was provided. Other than that, I'm open, Rawlson, and I don't know how else everyone else on the team feel if we could extend an extra 15 minutes for
Absolutely.
us to wrap up. Thank you so much for sharing, Khadija. And honestly, I know it continues to be a trigger for us every time. Thank you so much for sharing. Did anyone else wanted to continue this conversation around the lines of what we were just discussing around policing?
Go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to stay on. I guess just to say one of the things that we've noticed, kind of just the situation that we currently have, right, with the police and this police specifically market or them marketing it is part of what we have this situation. So again, so the police get these big multi-million-dollar increases every year. As a result, other social services are directly underfunded. So things like mental health response, housing. So then you get people in crisis, right? So you get people, people with mental health crisis, maybe running in the street, and then that scares, from what we hear, mostly white people, who then go, oh my God, and they call the police, and the police go, look at all these crazy people, we need more money, and they get more money, and then that's the cycle, and it's been very successful. So what we're trying to say is that we're going to interrupt that cycle. We're going to say, no. You don't get that money. The money goes into social services, which are, by the way, again, proven to actually keep us all safer, right? And by the way, this is from the OPS's own stats. When I looked at their own stats in terms of this idea of crime reduction, then they're not even doing that, right? There's absolutely no connection between giving the OPS more money and crime rates. They go up, they go down. Zero connection between like this idea that give more money, crime goes down. Completely false.
Thank you, Robin. Marie?
Not only do they get more money from the city, but a lot of time, and I'm speaking from personal experience because I started a nonprofit organization for mental health because I lost my sister who struggled with mental illness. And every time she would get arrested, then her family had to come and bail her out. So we had to pay to get her, to bail her out. And not only that, after she passed away, receiving bills from the justice system because she didn't make it to court on time or something like that. So that's a cycle. Not only does it impacts us because we don't get enough resources in our community, but it takes money directly from our pockets. So that needs to change and that needs to be addressed.
Vanessa?
I wasn't there for the budget presentation at the beginning, so I apologize if this was already addressed. I think that the issue as well with policing is the fact that when they're talking about increasing their budget, to my understanding, most of this money that they're asking for is to be used for police recruitment, for training, and specifically training on how to deal with mental health episodes, interactions with folks in the city. And so the thing is that specifically speaking for the Ottawa Black Diaspora Coalition, we aren't seeking for police to be involved in mental health response. That's not something that police should be doing. And at the end of the day, we don't believe that more money should be allocated towards that quote unquote training and towards recruiting more police because like Robin had mentioned, we're essentially funding criminality by doing this, right? Like you're going out and you're recruiting to have more police part of this system. You're essentially funding to promote the police department, which essentially their main duty is to respond to crime instead of pouring money into the resources that can help us to eliminate that. And I think that it's like Khadijah had mentioned, there's nobody, it's really sad because on this call, we have a lot of different groups here who have come together who are doing the work on a day-to-day basis in different, components of socioeconomic issues. And it's really sad that we don't see that type of advocacy or knowledge at the city level to where we can kind of dead those conversations right away when we're talking about the ways in which police impact BIPOC communities. And not to say that there aren't city folks who are engaged in this work, who are very much involved in trying to learn more and do better. But it's just, there are so many of us who do this work on a day-to-day basis, trying to, provide different alternative solutions and come almost religiously to different meetings to advocate on behalf of how this has impacted us in our communities. And still, we're still having to show up to more focus groups, and still, we're still having to show up to different, consultation sessions where we're still having to advocate on behalf of why this is dangerous for us. And so I think that what I want to bring across with this policing section specifically is that we keep coming to the table to address how this is impacting us, how this is hurtful, but we don't see this type of advocacy at the city level to basically abolish, reinvest in social programs the way that advocacy groups are doing right now. And when I'm saying that, I'm trying to talk about the fact that we're not questioning the need for police the way that we need to be at a city level. I think that even when we're talking about before, there was a conversation about discretionary funds, and I'm pretty sure that police are one of those resources that the city sees as being like, we absolutely need to have them, but why? Why isn't that questioned as to why is that we absolutely need to have police? And what kind of services and resources do they provide to the BIPOC communities and communities here in Ottawa that makes our communities safer? Because like it was mentioned before, us funding them and providing them more money actually doesn't keep our communities safe and make them safer. And I think that that's the kind of analysis that I'm really hoping comes out of these kind of conversations is why is the police a necessary emergency response that Ottawa needs to continue to have?
Thank you, Vanessa. Hector.
Thank you for having me. I think part of Vanessa's say was that from the budget that Wendy presented, OPS budget is pretty much non-discretionary. What it means is that pretty much, yes, it's something that is regulated, mandated, even though it's the OPS board that sort of sit down with the police and draw line by line, where other police sit down, prepare their budget, and then the board send to the council, right? But for me, I'm looking at the OPS budget in terms of the major cities across Canada, right? The highest we can see is Winnipeg. Okay, Winnipeg spends 26.8% of the city's budget on policing. Ottawa spends 9.5% of the city's budget on policing. Peel, region of Peel, spends 19% of the city's budget on policing. Durham spends 18% of the city's budget on policing. We have Halton spends 20% of the city's budget on policing. Okay, Vancouver 21%. So pretty much, okay, this is when you figure this out in relation to the crime severity index. Ottawa's police budget is really not that huge that we can say, hey, it's a sizable portion of the city's budget and we need to be cut down. For me, yes, I'm all for efficiencies. Where there are deficiencies, we need to cut. Society has placed certain roles on the police they were not trained for. Okay, police are not social workers. Nobody trains them to be social workers. Yet the society has given them that work to do. That is what we are saying. Let's take that work back and see how the whole thing will unfold. And not only Ottawa here, policing across Canada. Okay, and it needs to change. What the policing that they designed was not designed for Black people, was designed to actually oppress and catch Black people and Indigenous people more than 200 years ago. Okay, ICMP was created purposely to harass Indigenous people, right? They are slave catchers, that's how we call them. So they are designed in such a way that, yes, they are to fight crimes and all that, to be modernized here and there. But we have to know there are certain functions that we have placed on police that should not be there. They should not be having that. Okay. So if we are talking about mental health calls that we are talking about, we have had so many stuff going on. Major cities across the world are really looking into how police respond to mental health calls. Even New York is implementing a section of a Kahoot model. Okay. Several cities are sort of doing it, and that is what we need to bring to bear on the city of Ottawa. Okay, if we concentrate our effort on reducing the budget, let's reduce the budget, that will not work. What we need to do is say, okay, hey, let's take these staff that are traditionally social work staff from the police, so the police can concentrate on doing police jobs. Yes, I know. About 80% of the budget, of the approximately 84% of the budget goes into salaries. Okay, that has happens. And now because they are unionized environment, now we have been able to hire very diverse people to represent the city, to look like the city. If we cut their budget, what happens is that those who just join, they are the ones who are going to be laid off. We'll be going back to those old white folks representing us. Nobody wants that. We told them we need to diversify the force, and they are doing it. So we have to be very strategic on what we are looking for. Okay, we know our relationship with the police is at 21. Okay, I call it catch 40. We need the police, but also we don't need them, right? And that's because certain things that we feel like the police should be able to help address. They come in and then the case worsens, right? So we need to be able to say, hey, let's see which roles are traditionally police roles and let them perform. Which roles could be performed by different organizations and different people, and let's sit down and do it and push the city to do it. Okay, if we push, we'll get the results. But if we only target the police and say there are other places too, okay, where we have racism everywhere. You go to the child welfare system. The problem there is even more than what we are seeing in the police, right? But we are not talking about that. There are several issues going on affecting Black people, Black children, Black youth that needs to be addressed holistically. So that will be my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. I think we'll end with Robin, and then if no one else wants to speak, we'll pass it over to the council.
Thank you very much. Trying to take my hand in, sorry. I just wanted to respond to what my brother Hector was saying. In terms of so what we did see, Wendy showed that the Ottawa police budget is, I think it was the third biggest line item in the budget, right? So it doesn't really matter how it compares to other cities. That's what's going on here in Ottawa. And then, this whole idea of, the police have raised this idea of, oh boy, if you cut our budget, then we're going to have to like fire all the brown officers and all the women we just hired, right? It's like that's their way of kind of threatening that they're going to do bad things when they could. On that issue, they could cut their $5 million special overtime budget or their $4 million regular overtime budget, right? Right? They can make other choices, but I think. Ultimately, though, again, I agree with what Sister Vanessa was saying, that, the big question is, like, this whole debate, the cops have been successful in getting us to be debating about what the cops are doing, as opposed to Vanessa's very key question, why do we need them at all, right? Why do we need them at all? And that's where, luckily, that's where, we're having the discussion, and it looks like the board, oh, sorry, the last thing is that this idea that the police budget is there's no discretion. No. Like I say, the board has the full power to freeze that budget, and let's hope they do.
Thank you, Robin. Andrea?
I just want to say, whether it's the police or other equity issues, we have our vote. Next year is a voting year, right? For city councilors, if I'm correct, and Councillor King can correct me, and we can track the voting patterns of different city councilors on the issues we care about. And if they're not supportive and responding to us, we don't vote for them. Black people were the largest racial minority at 7%, maybe a bit more. In Ottawa, we have at least 25% racialized people, right? We have power, we have the ability to change. We made the difference in the last federal election, and we made the difference again in this federal election. So let's take the power that we have and start holding these people accountable, right? Even if they're not listening to us when we go to those meetings, but you can vote and harness other people to vote as well, right? So that's something that we can do, and that's very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andrea. Leila?
Following up what was just said, I think one of the things about the police that is really pervasive to me, and one of the reasons that I think every day that they exist is a problem to like the way that we function as a community and understand policing, is that we have a lot of folks who are newcomers to the city, are low income folks who have a lot of responsibilities, whether it's their family, work, like all of the things that we know as Black folks that we have to hold. And I think the way that I have seen and a lot seen the police very specifically prey on the fact that our community doesn't know its rights, aren't being like, I don't think that we like has been mentioned throughout the call often, is like we don't have the resources to be educating our community on different means of safety provision, and we don't have the resources to be able to even create those other systems and even like test those things out, because as we know, policing is something that, of course, has existed for a long time and is based in anti-Blackness and colonialism and all of those things, but it also is a process that was tested through the violent acts that we lived before policing became the structure that it did. And so I think in that same way, we're not, every day that we're not getting the chance to be receiving the education on what our rights are and receiving the education on how communities can come together and create safety for themselves. And even just like the fact that Ottawa is such a dispersed city and that a lot of folks, Black folks, are isolated in different parts of the city. I think that there are a lot of things that I'm seeing the police services understand and prey on to allow themselves to be strong and like be able to continue to, even within our community, promote themselves and have our community, and especially those who are more disenfranchised or cast aside, that they're the ones who also believe and support this type of policing because they're not offered an alternative, or even the fact that they have rights to an alternative.
Thank you, Daniel.
Before Rawlson King, Councillor Rawlson closes this session today, I wanted to share that my observation has been that the society is really changing. Organizational change is now necessary in order for progressive institutions to be able to be innovative and thrive. They must change their organizational culture and apply an inclusive lens in everything that they do. So I want to encourage you not to give up. I want to encourage you to continue pressing on the gas. And this is not the time for us to take a break. If you do need to take a break, do so. But please, please come back to the table and continue advocating and reflecting the need on behalf of the community. I thank you again for coming here tonight. Merci pour ceux qui ont pris le temps d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Puis on va continuer la conversation et le dialogue.
And thank you, Ketcha, for the wonderful job, and Dumo for the wonderful job, as well as Sophia for the wonderful job of moderating this session. We wanted to hear from you. We wanted to hear from more diverse voices, and I think that we've accomplished that tonight on all topics, as whether they're controversial or more controversial. You know, I wanted to hear from you your concerns, especially around policing as well. And the policing component is important because there are a number of changes, as we might know, that have been mandated by the province. I think that that's one of the challenges, is that many things around the police services board are mandated. But we're seeking some changes. The province has introduced changes to ensure that the municipal chief of police is not the only person who is responsible for community safety. We will now have a community safety and well-being plan, which is actually coming to the Community Protective Services Committee tomorrow. So we're starting a process of ensuring that we do see public safety issues move into the sphere of social services. The city, through council, has also directed that a mental health strategy be directed by the city, not by the police service. So, and in terms of the consultation process, this time it is different for policing. And I like to think that I had a small part in that by saying that community members needed more meaningful input into that process. So there has been a process that has attempted to reach out to communities in a different fashion and engage communities for a longer period of time, rather than the document just dropping in November like years past, where the public and the Police Services Board would be in receipt and then start to look at it. There has been inputs before with a view not just to move forward with a budget with a inflationary increase, but to look at the potential of a budget that comes in below or at zero. So I think that those are substantive changes. Changes aren't quick enough for me, but we continue to work to ensure that we see changes across the board, whether it's the establishment of an anti-racism secretariat and a strategy, whether it's the establishment of a social procurement strategy that will specifically take into account Black, Indigenous, and other residents from other groups, so that they could have fair opportunities at the government contracts that we have at the city, to employment equity and ensuring that we have a process that brings in more people into the city and provides greater leadership opportunities for people in management. So we're listening, and we're going to continue to work for better results. And I hope that this was a small step in that, ensuring that we had a process and brought more diverse voices into the budget process, so that we can hear from you and take those inputs back both to city staff and council. So I'm really thankful that you've been able to provide your input. This is just the beginning of a process. That process was outlined by Ms. Stephenson, our treasurer. You can find out more about that process at ottawa.ca and under the budget process, but there will be opportunities to provide deputations, and there'll be continuous opportunities to provide input after budgets are tabled at different committees, boards, and right up until it comes to council. So I really thank you for sharing your valuable evening with us today.
Thank you. Bonsoir.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you.